The desert sun beat down on forward operating base Horizon like Judgment Day, and Captain Maya Reynolds walked through the security checkpoint exactly 20 minutes before the mission briefing. At 34, she carried herself with a quiet determination that made others uneasy, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, tactical gear worn with practiced familiarity, and eyes that revealed nothing of the battle plans forming beneath her composed exterior. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Another support officer trying to play soldier, Lieutenant. Colonel Blackwell muttered to his executive officer as they verified her credentials. These desk jockeys think a few training exercises qualify them for combat operations. Maya accepted her temporary clearance with a professional nod. The Special Operations Tactical Leadership Program at FOB Horizon was designed to prepare select officers for high-risk missions, a 6-week course that most participants found either exhilarating or terrifying. Maya appeared to find it neither, maintaining the same focused demeanor whether discussing infiltration techniques or extraction protocols. Her quarters on the edge of the base mirrored the practical efficiency of her demeanor. Spartan accommodations, minimal personal effects, nothing that suggested attachments or sentimentality. The weathered field manual on her desk told its own story, pages dog-eared and annotated with precise handwriting, showing years of dedicated study rather than casual interest. During the first week of the program, subtle details accumulated that didn't align with her official role as a logistics and support officer. Her posture remained perfectly balanced without conscious effort, the kind of stance that came from years of specialized training rather than occasional PT sessions. She demonstrated an uncanny situational awareness, instinctively noting all entry and exit points, consistently positioning herself with tactical advantage in every room. "Did you see how she handled that CQB drill?" whispered Captain Rodriguez, another program participant from the engineering corps. "Like she's been clearing rooms her entire career." During the combat simulation exercises, Maya's movements flowed with a fluid precision that suggested far more field experience than any support officer should possess. Fellow officers began noticing the way she instinctively reacted to unexpected scenarios, responses that spoke of battlefield experience rather than theoretical knowledge. The scars on her forearms became visible during hand-to-hand combat training, thin white lines too methodical and numerous to be accidents from routine service. Her knowledge of enemy tactics extended far beyond what the program materials covered, anticipating questions about countermeasures that hadn't been addressed yet. "How did you know about the new insurgent IED configurations?" asked Major Wilson, a veteran with 3 combat tours who now worked as an instructor. "That information wasn't in any of our briefing packets." Maya's response was characteristically concise, research, but Wilson's expression hardened slightly. 15 years in special operations had taught him to recognize when someone was concealing something significant. Background checks revealed a puzzling 3-year gap in her service record, a void that raised more questions than answers for anyone who took the time to look closely. What none of them could see were the flashback glimpses that haunted her. Quiet moments, fragments of classified missions conducted in hostile territories across Central Asia and North Africa. Operations so sensitive that their very existence remained sealed in intelligence files, marked with clearance levels that most generals would never access. She carried the weight of betrayal by the command structure that once promised to support her. Decisions made by staff officers and politicians who never experienced the consequences of their choices. Her original unit had been scattered after one particularly devastating mission, lost not to enemy action, but to the political calculations of those who valued expediency over operational integrity. Rather than accept commendations built on half-truths and careful omissions, she had chosen to transfer to support roles becoming almost invisible in the system that once recognized her potential. The memories of fallen teammates haunted her daily existence, their voices echoing in her dreams, their sacrifices rendered meaningless by reports that distorted what really happened in the field. She remembered each face, each voice, each moment of camaraderie shared in impossible circumstances, carrying their stories like sacred promises that must never be forgotten. As Maya sat alone in the mess hall during dinner, watching other officers form social groups and share stories about their backgrounds, she felt the familiar weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. The burden grew heavier rather than lighter with the passage of time, a constant reminder of the price paid for competence in a system that preferred comfort over capability. Little did she know that across the room, a decorated commander in standard BDUs was studying her intently. General Lovra Garrison's memories from classified mission reports beginning to surface in her mind, like puzzle pieces finally connecting to form a coherent picture. Colonel Victor Hayes commanded respect through intimidation alone. At 47, his entire identity centered around an unbending adherence to tradition and conventional military doctrine. He carried himself with the swagger of someone who had never questioned whether the system that promoted him actually produced the best leaders for modern warfare. Second-generation career officer, he represented everything that Maya had learned to distrust about military hierarchy. His career spanned 2 decades of advancement through positions that reinforced his belief in rigid command structures and conventional tactics, even as warfare itself evolved beyond recognition. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The old boy's network that protected his reputation ensured that his more controversial decisions rarely faced serious scrutiny from superiors who shared similar backgrounds and perspectives. Female officers are a necessary compromise, he often told his subordinates during private conversations. They serve admirably in support roles, but combat operations require qualities that women simply don't possess naturally. It's basic biology, not discrimination. During the program's tactical assessment session, Hayes took his position at the front of the operations center with practiced authority. His eyes swept across the assembled officers with barely concealed judgment, pausing briefly on Maya before moving on without apparent recognition. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the certainty of someone accustomed to unquestioning compliance. "You are here because we occasionally need officers from support branches to understand combat operations. This does not make you qualified to lead such missions. This does not make you combat operators. You are observers in our domain, and you will conduct yourselves accordingly." Maya sat perfectly still in the second row, her expression revealing nothing about her thoughts regarding Hayes's opening remarks. But something in her composure seemed to catch his attention, and his eyes returned to her with growing focus. "Some of you may think your support branch experience qualifies you to question combat operational procedures," Hayes continued, his gaze now fixed on Maya. "I assure you, it does not. Combat tactics exist for reasons that support officers cannot fully comprehend." In the back of the room, General Garrison adjusted her uniform uncomfortably. She had come to observe the leadership program as part of her duties overseeing special operations integration. But something about the captain in the second row was triggering memories she couldn't quite place. Her face seemed familiar in a way that made her pulse quicken with recognition. After the session, Hayes approached Maya directly, his smile containing no warmth. "Captain Reynolds, isn't it? I noticed you seemed particularly attentive during my remarks about combat leadership principles." "I was listening," Maya replied, simply, her voice betraying no emotion. "Good. Some officers come here thinking they understand battlefield realities after spending their careers behind desks. I trust you won't be one of those problems." Maya met his gaze steadily. "I'm here to learn the program requirements and complete them successfully." Something in her calm response irritated Hayes in a way he couldn't quite identify. Most officers either showed nervous deference to his rank or defensive pride in their specialties. Maya's complete lack of reaction to his intimidation tactics felt like a challenge to his authority. "We'll see," he said finally, making a mental note to watch this particular officer closely. As the days progressed, Hayes began his campaign of focused pressure almost immediately. Despite Maya's consistent performance meeting or exceeding all stated requirements, he assigned her the most physically demanding tasks, additional night operations, and evaluation scenarios that other participants recognized as deliberately excessive. "Reynolds, your reaction time is 3 seconds below acceptable standards," he would announce during tactical exercises, criticizing performance metrics that appeared exemplary to everyone else. "Support branch standards aren't acceptable here." Public correction became his preferred method, highlighting her supposed shortcomings in front of the entire group while offering exaggerated praise to male officers for identical or inferior performance. Maya endured each incident in complete silence, never defending herself or attempting to explain her actions to those who witnessed these exchanges. Her calm responses only seemed to fuel his determination to break through what he perceived as stubborn defiance masquerading as professionalism. Other participants quickly learned to follow the colonel's lead, understanding that associating with his target could result in similar treatment for themselves. "I know it's unfair," whispered Captain Rodriguez to Major Wilson during a break, "but I can't afford to get on Hayes's bad side. My next deployment depends on his recommendation." Wilson nodded grimly. "Guy's got serious issues with female officers, but she's handling it better than anyone I've seen before." Exclusion from group planning sessions became the norm as conversations stopped when Maya approached and tactical discussions mysteriously excluded her input. Whispered comments followed her movements around the base, speculation about what she might have done to earn such focused attention from someone of Hayes's influence and position. The social isolation intensified daily, as people who might naturally respect her skills chose self-preservation over professional integrity. Maya accepted this treatment with the same stoic composure she showed toward the colonel's direct challenges, neither seeking allies nor expressing frustration at their absence. But General Garrison continued observing from the periphery, her unease growing with each passing day. Something about Maya's bearing, her responses under pressure, the way she carried herself through sustained harassment, it all felt hauntingly familiar to operations she had overseen years earlier. Late at night in her quarters, she found herself accessing classified databases she hadn't reviewed in years, searching for a connection she couldn't quite articulate. The breakthrough would come soon, but for now, Maya endured Hayes's campaign with the same quiet resilience that had sustained her through trials far worse than anything a peacetime officer could devise. She had survived battlefield conditions that would break most soldiers and the betrayal of command structures that abandoned her team when they needed support most. One man's petty tyranny was merely another obstacle to navigate while she served her deeper purpose. The critical field exercise was supposed to be straightforward, a simulated extraction operation designed to evaluate officers' ability to adapt to changing battlefield conditions. Teams of 4 would be given a scenario involving hostile territory and limited resources, then asked to develop and execute a response strategy. Most officers approached the exercise with the enthusiasm of people participating in a sophisticated training evolution. Maya's team found themselves assigned the most complex scenario, a hostage recovery operation in an urban environment with multiple hostile factions and severely restricted support options. While her teammates Captain Rodriguez from engineering, Major Wilson from special operations training, and Lieutenant Park from communications huddled around maps, arguing about standard approaches, Maya sat quietly studying the terrain model and intelligence reports. "We should establish a perimeter here and call for air support," suggested Rodriguez, pointing to an area on the map. Standard procedure calls for containment before extraction. That won't work, Maya interrupted softly, her first substantial contribution to the team discussion. The urban density makes air support high risk for collateral damage, and a static perimeter would telegraph our approach vector. Wilson looked up from the intelligence summary. What do you suggest? Maya moved to the terrain model, her finger tracing alternative infiltration routes with practiced precision. Split team approach here and here. Alpha element creates a precision diversion at this secondary location, while Bravo executes the actual extraction through this subsurface access point. Complete communications blackout for the first 15 minutes to prevent pattern recognition by hostile forces. Her teammates stared at the plan she had outlined with growing amazement. The strategy accounted for variables none of them had considered, anticipating enemy responses and counter-responses, with encyclopedic knowledge of insurgent tactics in urban environments. How did you know about the tunnel systems under this sector? Park asked. Those weren't in any of our briefing materials. Maya's expression remained neutral. Pattern recognition from similar urban environments. When the exercise began. In the pre-dawn hours, Maya's team executed her strategy with precision that surprised even the observer controllers. Her knowledge of specialized infiltration techniques and non-standard communication protocols guided their entire approach, demonstrating familiarity with procedures that weren't covered in any orientation material. While other teams struggled with conventional approaches that observer controllers easily countered, Maya's team moved through the scenario with a fluid efficiency that suggested years of actual field experience rather than theoretical training. When the exercise concluded and teams presented their after-action reports to Colonel Hayes and the evaluating officers, Maya's team earned the highest marks despite Hayes's obvious reluctance to acknowledge their success. Interesting approach. Captain Reynolds, Hayes said slowly, his voice carrying new undercurrents of suspicion. Where exactly did you develop your expertise with hostage extraction scenarios? Previous training exercises, Maya replied simply. Various locations, various contexts. But her teammates had noticed details that made them increasingly uneasy. During the night operation, others had instinctively followed her hand signals and positioning, despite her official status as a logistics officer. Her ability to anticipate simulated enemy movements and coordinate team responses suggested experience that contradicted everything in her service record. These inconsistencies began creating whispers among participants who started questioning whether Maya Reynolds was really who she claimed to be. Her knowledge of classified infiltration techniques and ability to navigate complex tactical scenarios suggested experience that no logistics officer should possess. Hayes noticed these anomalies with growing suspicion that transformed his initial pleasure at having someone to dominate into genuine concern about what he might be dealing with. That evening, he began investigating her background more thoroughly, using his security clearance to access personnel databases that should contain complete information about anyone permitted in the program. The barriers he encountered proved frustrating and unprecedented, restricted files and security protocols that blocked access to information about someone who supposedly held no special operational status. This doesn't make any sense, he muttered to his assistant, Captain Green, as they reviewed the search results. Support officers don't have this level of security protection. Green leaned over the computer screen, frowning at the unusual access denial messages. Sir, these classification levels. I've never seen restrictions like this for personnel files. Hayes's frustration mounted as every avenue of investigation led to dead ends or classified blocks that required clearances above his level. Maya's calm responses to his increasingly aggressive criticism unsettled him in ways that simple defiance never could, suggesting depths of experience and self-control that challenged his own accomplishments. Late nights found him reviewing program performance metrics and security reports, searching for concrete evidence about the woman who refused to break under pressure that had destroyed others with stronger official credentials. The more he searched, the more convinced he became that Maya Reynolds was concealing something significant, something that made his harassment campaign feel suddenly dangerous rather than merely satisfying to his ego. Meanwhile, General Garrison's own investigation was yielding disturbing results. The facial recognition analysis she had quietly run through classified databases had returned a match that made her blood run cold. The woman participating in the leadership program as Captain Maya Reynolds bore a striking resemblance to someone whose operational history was accessible to only a handful of people at the highest levels of military command. Captain Maya Reynolds, she whispered to herself, reading through digital files that hadn't been accessed in over 3 years. The records painted a picture that contradicted everything the leadership program represented, showing an officer whose service record included missions conducted in hostile territories where conventional forces couldn't officially operate. Her psychological evaluations described someone with extraordinary resilience and tactical brilliance, qualities that made her invaluable for operations where traditional military approaches would fail catastrophically. But according to the official record, Captain Reyes had been removed from field operations 3 years ago, after a classified mission that went catastrophically wrong due to command interference and intelligence failures. Garrison's hands trembled slightly as she scrolled through after-action reports that detailed how a special reconnaissance team had been compromised when political considerations overrode operational security. The operation had been designed to prevent a terrorist attack on civilian targets. But when diplomatic sensitivities became a concern during deployment, the team found themselves without critical support that had been promised during planning phases. The general stared at her computer screen for a long moment, processing the implications of what she had discovered. If Maya Reynolds was indeed Maya Reyes, then she wasn't just a capable officer, but a decorated special operations leader whose supposed reassignment to support roles had been fabricated to protect ongoing intelligence objectives after a mission that exposed critical failures in command decision-making. She had chosen to accept reassignment rather than reveal failures that could damage institutional credibility and operational security. The weight of this revelation settled over Garrison like a heavy blanket. Colonel Hayes's harassment campaign wasn't just inappropriate, it was being directed at someone whose operational experience made his own career look like a training exercise by comparison. As the sun rose on another day of the leadership program, Garrison wondered how long Reynolds could maintain her cover under Hayes's escalating pressure. And more importantly, she wondered what would happen when the truth finally emerged in a setting where appearances mattered more than substance, where rank often trumped experience, and where political considerations frequently overrode operational integrity. The storm was building, and Garrison suspected that FOB Horizon was about to witness something that would challenge everything its personnel thought they knew about leadership, sacrifice, and what it truly meant to serve with honor under fire. The Live Fire exercise was scheduled for 0600 hours on the final day of the leadership assessment, a comprehensive drill designed to evaluate officers' ability to make critical decisions under realistic combat conditions. Attendance was mandatory for all program participants. A culminating event that Colonel Hayes insisted demonstrated the unbridgeable gap between support officers and those with genuine combat experience. Maya stood with the other officers at the firing range, her expression composed as the safety officers distributed live ammunition and reviewed the course parameters. The familiar weight of the tactical gear settled on her shoulders like a memory, each piece positioned with the unconscious precision of someone who had worn similar equipment in situations where proper placement meant survival. Today's exercise will separate those who understand combat reality from those who merely study it in manuals, Hayes announced, his eyes finding Maya in the formation. Some of you will discover that theory and practice are very different matters when live rounds are involved. The course itself was demanding even by special operations standards, a complex sequence of movement under fire, target discrimination, and tactical decision-making that pushed participants to their physical and mental limits. As officers rotated through the course in pairs, Hayes positioned himself where he could observe Maya's performance with particular scrutiny. When her turn came, something shifted in her demeanor, a subtle transformation that the more experienced observers noticed immediately. Her movements flowed with a practiced economy that spoke of extensive field experience. Each position change and target engagement executed with a precision that came from muscle memory rather than recent training. "Jesus," whispered Major Wilson, as he watched her clear a particularly challenging section of the course. "She's not even thinking about it. It's all instinct and training." Maya completed the course with the highest score of any participant, her performance setting a new record for the program, despite Hayes's obvious attempts to find flaws in her technique. The results created an uncomfortable tension among the observers who couldn't reconcile her official background with the skills they had just witnessed. Luck and good reflexes, Hayes dismissed when another instructor commented on her exceptional performance. "Let's see how she handles the command decision scenario this afternoon." But General Garrison had seen enough to confirm her suspicions. The woman moving through that course wasn't just a capable officer. She was someone who had operated in environments where such skills meant the difference between life and death for entire teams. The time for quiet observation had ended. Intervention was becoming necessary before Hayes pushed too far and created a situation that could expose classified operations. The command decision scenario was designed to be the most challenging event of the entire program, a simulated combat situation where officers would be evaluated on their ability to make critical choices under extreme pressure with incomplete information and conflicting priorities. Participants were divided into small teams, each assigned a different scenario involving complex tactical problems without clear solutions. Maya's team, which included Rodriguez, Wilson, and 2 other officers, found themselves facing what appeared to be an impossible situation, a simulated ambush with multiple casualties, limited ammunition, and no immediate extraction option. As the scenario unfolded in the Tactical Operations Center, with instructors playing the roles of wounded team members and enemy forces, the other officers looked instinctively to Maya for direction, despite her junior rank in support branch. "Designation. We're outnumbered and outgunned," said Rodriguez, reviewing the situation map with growing concern. "Standard procedure would be to call for immediate air support and establish a defensive position until extraction." "Negative," Maya responded, her voice carrying a natural authority that none of them had heard before. "Air support is minimum. 20 minutes out, and our wounded won't last that long. Enemy forces have established blocking positions here and here, cutting off conventional extraction routes." Without hesitation, she began outlining a counter-assault strategy that violated conventional doctrine but addressed the specific tactical problems they faced. Her plan incorporated elements of several combat manuals, but reconfigured them in ways that showed intimate knowledge of how actual enemy forces operated, rather than how training scenarios portrayed them. Split the team, 2 elements. First team creates a diversionary attack at their weakest position to draw their reserve forces. Second team moves the wounded through this ravine system. It's not on their maps because it's seasonal, only appears after heavy rain. They won't have it covered. The other officers stared at her in stunned silence, recognizing that her solution incorporated terrain knowledge and enemy psychology that went far beyond the information provided in the scenario briefing. "How do you know their maps don't show?" "The ravine system?" Wilson asked quietly. Maya's expression remained focused on the tactical problem. "Pattern recognition. This region's topographical surveys were conducted during dry season. Standard insurgent groups use commercial mapping with the same limitations. As the scenario progressed and they implemented her strategy, Maya demonstrated an uncanny ability to anticipate the instructor's attempts to complicate the situation. Each new challenge was met with immediate adjustments that showed not just theoretical understanding but the kind of adaptive thinking that came from actual combat experience. Colonel Hayes observed from the control room, his initial satisfaction at creating an impossible scenario turning to growing unease as he watched Maya navigate problems that should have overwhelmed any support officer regardless of their training or intelligence. When the exercise concluded and teams presented their after-action reports, Maya's solution had achieved all primary objectives with minimal simulated casualties, an outcome that the program designers had considered theoretically impossible when creating the scenario. "Fascinating approach, Captain Reynolds," Has said slowly, unable to hide the suspicion in his voice. "Your solution incorporated elements that weren't included in any briefing materials. Would you care to explain how a logistics officer develops such specialized tactical knowledge?" "Training and study, sir," Maya replied evenly. "Different perspectives sometimes reveal options that conventional approaches might miss." But her teammates had witnessed something during the exercise that couldn't be explained by training manuals or theoretical study. Under pressure, Maya had displayed the distinctive command presence and decision-making patterns of someone who had led actual combat operations in environments similar to the simulated scenario. These inconsistencies created growing speculation among both participants and instructors, who began questioning fundamental assumptions about the quiet captain, whose official record seemed increasingly disconnected from her demonstrated capabilities. Hayes found himself in the uncomfortable position of facing a subordinate, whose composure he couldn't break and whose abilities he couldn't dismiss, despite his best efforts to do both. That evening, he escalated his investigation, contacting former commanders and colleagues listed in her service record to find something, anything, that would explain the discrepancies he had observed. The contradictions he uncovered only deepened the mystery. Former supervisors described the competent but unremarkable logistics officer who performed her duties efficiently without drawing attention. A description that bore little resemblance to the tactically brilliant officer he had been observing for weeks. "This doesn't add up," he told Captain Green as they reviewed the latest information. "Her file shows standard support branch training, but she demonstrates combat skills that take years to develop under actual field conditions." Green nodded thoughtfully. "Sir, have you considered the possibility that her record might be deliberately incomplete? There are programs that operate under different classification systems." Hayes dismissed the suggestion with a wave of his hand. "Those programs would still appear in her record at my clearance level. This is something else, something that doesn't follow standard protocols." Meanwhile, General Garrison had reached a decision that would change everything. After reviewing the classified files and observing Maya's performance throughout the program, she understood that the charade could not continue without risking exposure of operations that remained sensitive even years after their completion. It was time to end the pretense before Hayes's increasingly desperate attempts to undermine Maya forced a confrontation that could compromise ongoing operational security. Some truths needed to be acknowledged, regardless of the institutional discomfort they might cause. The program's final evaluation and certification ceremony was scheduled for the following morning, a formal event where successful participants would receive their qualifications and future assignments. Colonel Hayes had decided to use this public occasion for one final attempt to assert his authority over Maya, assigning her to present the unit colors during the opening ceremony, a task he assumed would force her to publicly acknowledge his dominance. "Reynolds, you'll be handling the colors during tomorrow's ceremony," he announced during the final briefing session. "Try not to embarrass yourself or the program with any logistics branch informality." Maya accepted the assignment without comment. But several participants noticed the slight tension in her jaw, the first visible reaction she had shown to any of Hayes's provocations over the entire 6-week program. Major Wilson, who had worked closely with her during several exercises, approached her after the briefing. "You all right with this?" he asked quietly, genuine concern in his voice. Maya considered her response carefully. Some ceremonies reflect genuine achievement. Others serve different purposes. I suppose we'll see which kind this is. Her cryptic answer left Wilson feeling uneasy, though he couldn't articulate exactly why. There was something in her tone that suggested deeper meanings beyond the simple words she had spoken. The morning of the ceremony arrived with clear skies and a cool breeze that made the base's flags snap crisply against their poles. 150 officers, instructors, and distinguished visitors gathered at the parade ground for the ceremony, including several high-ranking officials who had come to observe the program's conclusion. General Garrison positioned herself strategically where she could monitor both Maya and the senior officers present. Her investigation had convinced her that today would mark the end of a carefully maintained fiction, though she wasn't certain exactly how that revelation would unfold. Colonel Hayes took his position at the podium with obvious satisfaction, surveying the assembled crowd with the confidence of someone who believed he had finally established dominance over a challenging subordinate. This ceremony would demonstrate his authority while forcing Maya into a public display of conventional military protocols. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hayes began, his voice carrying clearly across the parade ground, "we gather today to recognize the successful completion of the Special Operations Tactical Leadership Program. These officers have demonstrated their capacity to understand the complex demands of combat operations through their dedication to mastering the skills and mindsets required for success under fire." Maya stood with the other officers in the designated formation, her expression composed but alert. The color guard waited nearby, prepared to present the flags when Colonel Hayes gave the signal for the national anthem. Today's ceremony reminds us of the distinction between those who support missions and those who execute them. Hayes continued, his eyes finding Maya in the formation. A distinction that requires respect for the specialized experience and capabilities that combat deployments develop in those who have faced enemy fire firsthand. General Garrison noticed the way Hayes emphasized certain phrases while looking directly at Maya, understanding that the colonel was using the ceremony itself as a final attempt to establish his narrative about who belonged in combat leadership positions and who did not. The color guard stepped forward as the bass band prepared to play the national anthem, and Hayes nodded toward Maya. "Captain Reynolds, present the colors." Maya moved to the flags with military precision that immediately caught the attention of everyone present. Her movements displayed the practiced efficiency that came from extensive ceremonial training rather than hasty preparation. But as the opening notes of the national anthem filled the air and everyone came to attention, Maya did something that sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. Instead of simply presenting the colors according to protocol, she executed the movements with such flawless precision and martial bearing that it transformed the routine ceremony into something extraordinary. Her performance didn't just meet the standard, it exemplified it in a way that made every other ceremonial presentation seem amateur by comparison. The gesture created immediate recognition among combat veterans present, who instantly recognized the distinctive precision that only came from elite units where such ceremonies carried profound meaning rather than mere tradition. Whispers began immediately despite the playing anthem, with experienced officers suddenly reassessing everything they thought they knew about the quiet captain. Colonel Hayes's face flushed with confusion and embarrassment as he realized that his attempt to publicly diminish Maya had backfired spectacularly. Instead of forcing her to perform inadequately, he had created a situation where her exceptional capability was visible to everyone present, including several senior officers whose opinions could affect his career. But General Garrison was watching. Something else entirely. The slow recognition dawning on the face of General Marcus Chen, the deputy commander for special operations, who had been studying Maya with growing intensity throughout the ceremony. Like Garrison, he had access to classified files that most officers would never see, and his expression suggested that significant memories were beginning to surface. As the anthem concluded and the immediate impact of Maya's performance began to register, General Chen rose from his seat with deliberate movements that drew attention from everyone nearby. His weathered face showed unmistakable signs of recognition as he stared at the woman whose exceptional presentation of the colors had created such a powerful impression. "Captain Maya Reynolds," he said quietly, but his voice carried clearly in the sudden silence that followed the anthem's conclusion. "Would you please step forward?" The silence that fell over the parade ground was absolute, a vacuum of sound that seemed to absorb even the desert wind. Every eye focused on the exchange between General Chen and the woman now revealed as Captain Maya Reynolds. Her carefully maintained cover had been exposed by someone whose authority exceeded everyone present, including Colonel Hayes, General Chen. Maya acknowledged with a crisp salute that displayed years of disciplined training. The transformation in her bearing was immediate and complete. Gone was the careful restraint she had maintained for weeks, replaced by the unmistakable presence of a combat leader. Colonel Hayes stared in growing horror as he began to understand that his harassment campaign had targeted someone with credentials far beyond his comprehension. The casual dismissal he had shown toward a supposed support officer was about to be revealed as a catastrophic error in judgment that could destroy his career and reputation. "Would you care to explain to everyone present why you've been participating in this program under an assumed identity?" General Chen asked, his tone respectful rather than accusatory. Maya stood at parade rest, her posture reflecting years of service in the military's most elite units. "Sir, I was following orders to evaluate the program's effectiveness in preparing officers for actual combat conditions." General Garrison stepped forward from her position among the senior officers. "Captain Reyes was conducting an authorized assessment of this leadership program at my direct request," she stated clearly, establishing the official narrative for what was about to unfold. The confusion spreading through the assembled officers was palpable as they struggled to reconcile the quiet logistics officer they thought they knew with the woman now standing before them. Colonel Hayes appeared physically ill as the implications became clear. For 6 weeks, he had been systematically undermining someone whose operational experience and authority exceeded his own. "Captain Reyes," General Chen continued, "perhaps you could share with these officers your actual qualifications to assess a combat leadership program." Maya's eyes swept across the formation, noting the expressions of confusion and dawning recognition on the faces of those who had participated in her systematic exclusion. "I served as team leader for Special Reconnaissance Unit 7 for 4 years," she stated simply. 3 combat deployments to classified locations, leading mixed-gender special operations teams in direct action missions. The revelation sent shock waves through the assembly. SRU-7 was legendary among those with clearance to know of its existence, an elite unit that operated in environments too politically sensitive for conventional forces, conducting missions that officially never happened in places where American troops were never deployed. General Garrison addressed the stunned audience. 3 years ago, Captain Reyes's unit was deployed to prevent a significant terrorist attack. When diplomatic concerns arose during their operation, critical support was withdrawn rather than risk political complications. Colonel Hayes felt the ground shifting beneath his feet as he realized the full magnitude of his error. For weeks, he had been harassing an officer whose combat experience made his own career look like a training exercise by comparison. "Her team completed the mission despite the lack of promised support," Garrison continued, "but the cost was severe. 4 team members lost their lives not because of enemy action, but because someone in a comfortable office decided that political convenience outweighed operator safety. Maya's expression remained composed, but those closest could see the pain that lived behind her professional exterior. 8 good soldiers died because someone at command level decided their lives were worth less than avoiding diplomatic discomfort. The commendations offered afterward were insulting, attempts to silence questions about why support was withdrawn when it was most critically needed. Major Wilson stepped forward from the formation without being called. "That's why you knew about the seasonal ravine systems in yesterday's exercise," he said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You weren't guessing or theorizing. You'd actually operated in similar terrain under actual combat conditions." "Yes," Maya acknowledged. "That scenario closely resembled our extraction after the mission parameters changed. We used natural features not present on standard maps to evacuate wounded team members when our primary exfil route was compromised." Captain Rodriguez looked physically ill as he realized how he had participated in her systematic exclusion despite benefiting from her expertise during every training evolution. "You could have said something," he said quietly. "We treated you like a support officer who didn't belong in combat discussions," Maya finished for him. "Which was exactly the point of this evaluation. This program is supposed to identify and develop combat leadership regardless of branch or background. Instead, it systematically excludes qualified personnel based on preconceptions and bias." General Chun addressed the assembled officers directly. Captain Reyes was the most decorated team leader in SRU-7's history. After the failed extraction that cost her teammates their lives, she requested transfer to support branches rather than continue in a system that valued political expediency over operator safety. The transformation of the crowd's attitude toward Maya was immediate and profound. Military personnel throughout the parade ground began to understand the true nature of the woman who had endured 6 weeks of systematic harassment without once using her actual authority or experience to shield herself. Colonel Hayes stepped forward, his face ashen. "Captain Reyes, I had no knowledge of your background or the purpose of your participation in this program." "That's precisely the problem, Colonel," she replied evenly. "You assumed based on my gender and official branch that I couldn't possibly have relevant combat experience. That assumption influences how you evaluate all female officers and non-combat branch personnel, regardless of their actual capabilities." General Garrison addressed the assembly. "This program was established to identify and develop combat leadership potential, regardless of branch or background. Captain Reyes's experience demonstrates exactly why such rigid preconceptions about who belongs in combat roles undermine our operational effectiveness." Maya's voice carried across the parade ground with the quiet authority of someone who had earned the right to be heard. "I didn't conceal my identity to embarrass anyone. I did it because some lessons can only be learned through direct experience. Effective combat leadership isn't about aggression or dominance. It's about making correct decisions under pressure, adapting to changing conditions, and placing mission success above personal ego." The ceremony had transformed from a routine graduation event into a profound moment of institutional self-examination. Maya's presence forced everyone to question whether their understanding of military leadership had been shaped more by tradition than reality, whether their evaluation systems identified actual combat effectiveness or merely reinforced comfortable biases. As the formal proceedings concluded, small groups of officers gathered to process what they had witnessed. The woman who had endured weeks of systematic exclusion had become the central figure of the entire program, though she had never sought such attention. "The real test of leadership isn't how you perform when everything goes according to plan," Maya told the officers who approached her afterward. "It's what you do when support is withdrawn, when intelligence fails, when the situation deteriorates beyond recognition." That's when you discover whether your training prepared you for reality or just for scenarios. Colonel Hayes found himself summoned to General Garrison's office before the day concluded. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by the sick realization that his career had just hit an immovable obstacle. The systematic harassment of a decorated combat leader represented a catastrophic failure of judgment that no explanation could mitigate. "Sit down, Colonel," General Garrison said, without looking up from the classified file she was reviewing. "We need to discuss your conduct toward Captain Reyes during the leadership program." Hayes settled into the chair across from her desk, his hands clasped tightly to hide their trembling. "General, I had no knowledge of her actual identity or experience. The information provided was deliberately limited," Garrison interrupted sharply. "But even if Captain Reyes had been exactly what she appeared to be, a logistics officer with no combat experience, your treatment of her would have been unprofessional and contrary to the program's stated objectives." Hayes's face flushed as he recognized the truth in her words. His behavior couldn't be justified regardless of Maya's actual background. "Ma'am, I was attempting to maintain the high standards required for combat leadership positions. You were enforcing your personal biases about who belongs in combat roles," Garrison stated flatly. "Captain Reyes endured 6 weeks of treatment that would have broken most officers. She did so while consistently outperforming every other participant in the program, despite your deliberate attempts to undermine her." The weight of his mistakes settled over Hayes like a physical burden. For 6 weeks, he had been systematically targeting someone whose combat record included operations that his career had never approached in complexity or danger. Her performance in the tactical exercises, he began, reflected her actual experience, leading special operations teams in environments where failure meant death, Garrison finished for him. "While you were running training exercises, Colonel, Captain Reyes was conducting real-world operations against high-value targets in non-permissive environments. Meanwhile, throughout the base, a different kind of reckoning was taking place. Among the other participants in the leadership program, Captain Rodriguez found himself remembering every moment when he had chosen silence over support, every planning session where he had ignored Maya's input, every situation where he had benefited from her expertise without acknowledging its source. I feel ashamed," he admitted to Major Wilson as they packed their gear that evening. "We let Hayes treat her like an outsider for 6 weeks because we were too concerned about our own evaluations to stand up for what was right." Wilson nodded grimly, his own military background making Maya's true identity even more significant. 15 years in special operations support, and I've never met anyone with credentials like hers. The missions SRU-7 conducted changed entire regional conflicts, and most of us never even knew they happened. The revelation had forced everyone to confront uncomfortable questions about moral courage and the difference between following protocol and enabling prejudice. Maya's quiet endurance of systematic exclusion had demonstrated a level of character that humbled those who had considered themselves battle-hardened professionals. General Chun spent the evening reviewing the program evaluations that Maya had submitted confidentially throughout her participation. Her assessments were brutally honest but constructively focused, identifying specific weaknesses in how the program identified and developed leadership potential across different branches and backgrounds. The fact that someone with her operational experience had been able to provide this internal perspective represented an opportunity that the military could not afford to waste. Captain Reyes possessed insights that could transform how combat leadership was identified and developed, if the institution was willing to learn from someone who had paid the ultimate price for systemic failures in command decision-making. "Captain Reyes," General Chun said when Maya reported to his office the following morning, "I have a proposition for you." Maya stood at attention, her posture reflecting years of disciplined service in the military's most demanding units. "The Combat Leadership Development Program needs a new director," Chun continued. Someone who understands both special operations realities and the institutional barriers that prevent us from identifying leadership potential outside traditional pathways. Maya considered the offer carefully, understanding that accepting would mean permanently emerging from the administrative obscurity that had protected her since her team's devastating final mission. It would mean confronting the system that had failed her team, but also the opportunity to prevent others from experiencing similar betrayal. "What would be expected, sir?" she asked. "Honesty," Chun replied simply. "No ceremonial acknowledgement of your return to operational roles. No public recognition of past accomplishments. No commendations or awards for missions that officially never happened. Just the truth about what combat leadership actually requires, regardless of how uncomfortable. That truth might be for an institution accustomed to tradition rather than effectiveness." The conditions reflected exactly what Maya valued most: substance over appearance, reality over tradition, integrity over recognition. Her acceptance came with the understanding that meaningful change would require challenging deeply entrenched assumptions about who belonged in combat leadership positions. "I accept," she said quietly. "But my teaching will include everything: the political interference that costs lives, the biases that exclude qualified personnel, the difference between looking like a leader and actually leading when everything goes wrong." Colonel Hayes's career effectively ended not through formal disciplinary action, but through the natural consequences of his demonstrated judgment. Senior officers who witnessed his treatment of a decorated combat leader understood immediately that his decision-making could not be trusted in positions of significant responsibility. His reassignment to logistics coordination represented not punishment, but recognition that his understanding of leadership needed fundamental reconstruction before he could be trusted with authority over others. The system adjusted not through dramatic policy changes, but through the quiet recognition that leaders who could not identify actual combat effectiveness when it stood before them lacked the discernment necessary for positions of real responsibility. Maya began her new role with characteristic directness, stripping away romantic notions about combat leadership to reveal the complex reality of making decisions under extreme pressure, where mistakes meant death and success often required defying conventional wisdom. Her students learned that effective leadership sometimes required questioning orders, that loyalty to the mission might demand challenging superiors, that genuine combat effectiveness often looked nothing like the aggressive dominance that traditional military culture celebrated. "Combat doesn't care about your branch, your gender, or your background," she told each new class. "It only cares about whether you can adapt, decide, and execute under the worst possible conditions. Everything else is just ceremony and tradition." The transformation at FOB Horizon spread gradually through daily interactions and changing expectations rather than formal policy announcements. Base culture shifted from rank-based deference to performance-based respect as personnel began understanding that combat effectiveness came in forms that traditional military evaluation systems often failed to recognize. 6 months after taking over the leadership program, Maya found herself facing the first all-female special operations team to complete the course, officers from various branches who had demonstrated exceptional tactical thinking and decision-making. Throughout the program, "You'll face resistance," she told them during their final briefing. "People will question your place in roles they believe belong exclusively to men with conventional backgrounds. Your technical proficiency will be dismissed, your tactical decisions scrutinized, your authority challenged in ways your male counterparts never experience." Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, a former intelligence officer who had graduated at the top of the class, met Maya's gaze directly. "How do we handle it, Captain?" Maya's response reflected the lessons of her own journey. "The same way you handle any tactical problem, with clarity, precision, and absolute focus on mission objectives." Your performance under fire will silence critics more effectively than any argument or credential ever could. The team's subsequent deployment to a classified operation in North Africa demonstrated exactly what Maya's reformed leadership program could produce. Operators selected for capability rather than conformity, trained to adapt rather than follow. Rigid doctrine evaluated on effectiveness rather than appearance. When their primary mission parameters were compromised by unexpected civilian presence in the target area, Lieutenant Martinez made the critical decision to abort the planned assault and develop an alternative approach that accomplished all primary objectives without a single civilian casualty. Captain Reyes taught us that the measure of combat leadership isn't how closely you follow the original plan. Martinez explained during her after-action briefing to General Chun. It's how effectively you adapt when the plan becomes impossible, without compromising mission objectives or team safety. 1 year after her dramatic revelation at the graduation ceremony, Maya's influence on combat leadership development had spread far beyond FOB Horizon. Her methods had been adopted by special operations training facilities across 3 branches of service as commanders, recognized the practical benefits of identifying leadership potential based on capability rather than category. Captain Reyes fundamentally changed how we think about combat leadership, explained Major Wilson, now serving as an instructor himself. She taught us that effective leaders aren't identified by how well they fit traditional expectations, but by how they perform when everything goes wrong and lives depend on correct decisions under impossible conditions. The classroom where Maya conducted leadership seminars had become something of a legendary space among special operations personnel, who understood they were witnessing a transformation in how combat effectiveness was identified and developed. Unlike traditional military instructors who emphasized aggression and dominance, Maya taught the kind of adaptive thinking that could only come from someone who had experienced both the best and worst of special operations command decisions. Her curriculum included no glorification of combat, no stirring speeches about warrior tradition that ignored the human cost of poor leadership. Instead, students encountered realistic scenarios where every decision carried moral weight and where the right choice might require defying conventional wisdom while accepting personal consequences. She tells us about real operators, said Lieutenant Jessica Chun, who had requested assignment to the leadership program specifically to study Maya's methods. People whose names will never appear in official histories, but whose decisions in critical moments determined whether missions succeeded and teammates survived. She teaches us that leadership belongs to those who can perform under the worst conditions, regardless of what they look like or where they came from. The transformation extended far beyond Maya's direct influence as her students advanced to operational positions throughout the special operations community, carrying forward lessons about adaptive leadership that gradually reshaped institutional culture from the ground up. Real change happened through accumulated mission successes rather than policy directives, daily demonstrations that the best combat decisions often came from unexpected sources. Colonel Hayes's journey toward understanding proved slow and difficult, requiring him to dismantle beliefs and attitudes that had shaped his identity for decades. His current position, coordinating logistic support, utilized his administrative skills while keeping him removed from leadership, roles that required the kind of judgment he was still developing. I was wrong about everything, he admitted during a conversation with General Garrison 18 months after the program. Not just about Captain Reyes, but about what makes someone effective in combat leadership positions. I spent 20 years thinking that leadership was about dominance and tradition, never understanding that it's about performance under conditions that break most people. His process of reflection illustrated that even deeply entrenched attitudes could evolve when confronted with undeniable evidence of their limitations. The systematic exclusion of a combat-proven leader had forced him to question not just his treatment of Maya, but his entire approach to evaluating military effectiveness. General Chun observed the transformation with satisfaction, recognizing that Maya's influence extended far beyond her formal responsibilities. She's established a new standard for how we identify and develop combat leadership, he noted in his annual program review. Students leave her program understanding that their effectiveness comes from what they can do under the worst possible conditions, not from how closely they match traditional expectations. 2 years after taking command of the leadership program, Maya found herself briefing the Joint Special Operations Command on the success rates of her graduates in actual combat deployments. The statistics spoke for themselves. Teams led by program graduates demonstrated higher mission completion rates, lower casualty figures, and superior adaptation to changing conditions compared to conventionally selected leadership. The data proves what we've always known but rarely acknowledged, she explained to the assembled commanders. Combat effectiveness isn't determined by gender, branch, or background. It's determined by the ability to make correct decisions under extreme pressure when lives and missions hang in the balance. The senior officers nodded in agreement, the evidence before them impossible to dismiss or explain away. The reform that had begun with one woman's quiet endurance of systematic harassment had grown into a transformation in how the military's most elite units identified and developed leadership. The old system selected for people who looked and sounded like traditional combat leaders, Maya concluded. Our program selects for people who can actually lead when everything goes wrong. The mission results speak for themselves. As she left the briefing, Maya passed a group of newly arrived candidates for the leadership program, a diverse collection of officers from various branches and backgrounds, who would have been excluded from combat leadership consideration. Under the old system. Is that her? Whispered one lieutenant to another as Maya walked by. The one they laughed at when she asked for a combat slot? That's Captain Reyes, confirmed a senior NCO who had served as an instructor in the program since its reformation. They laughed when she asked for a combat slot. Then she took the lead in the worst battle her unit ever faced and brought home survivors when no one thought it was possible. Maya overheard the exchange but continued walking without acknowledging it. Her legacy wasn't built on recognition or reputation, but on the transformation she had created in how combat leadership was identified, developed, and deployed. The woman they had laughed at had changed everything, not through dramatic confrontation, but through quiet competence that proved more powerful than any tradition or prejudice could withstand. 5 years after the legendary Kamal Valley rescue operation, Major Maya Reyes stood at the podium in the Joint Special Operations Command Auditorium. The room was filled with military leadership from across all branches, generals, admirals, and senior civilian officials gathered to hear the annual briefing on the Combat Leadership Evolution Program that had revolutionized special operations over the past half-decade. In the 5 years since CLEP implementation, Maya began, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had become her trademark. Mission success rates across special operations units have increased by 37%. Casualty rates have decreased by 42%. Adaptation to unforeseen field conditions has improved by 61%, according to after-action assessments. The statistics displayed on the screen behind her told a story that no one in the room could dismiss, a transformation in operational effectiveness that had exceeded even the most optimistic projections when the program began. But numbers only tell part of the story, Maya continued. The real measure of this program's success isn't in statistics, but in the fundamental shift in how we identify, develop, and deploy combat leadership potential. In the front row, General Chun nodded with satisfaction. His decision to champion Maya's approach 5 years earlier had faced significant resistance from traditional military leadership. Now the results had silenced even the most vocal critics. CLEP graduates are currently leading operations in 17 countries, Maya explained, indicating a global map with mission sites highlighted. Each of these leaders was selected not for conformity to traditional expectations, but for demonstrated ability to adapt and succeed under the most challenging conditions. As the briefing continued, Maya detailed specific operations where CLIP graduates had achieved objectives that conventional approaches had deemed impossible. In each case, success had come not through superior resources or firepower, but through innovative approaches that traditional military thinking would never have considered. The program's core principle remains unchanged, she concluded. Combat leadership effectiveness isn't determined by demographic factors or branch background, but by the ability to make correct decisions under extreme pressure when lives and missions hang in the balance. After the formal presentation, Admiral Jackson, the newly appointed head of Joint Special Operations Command, approached Maya directly. At 62, he represented the old guard of military leadership, a decorated combat veteran whose 35-year career had been built on conventional special operations doctrine. Major Reyes, he said formally, your results are undeniably impressive, but I have concerns about the program's direction under your leadership. Maya maintained a neutral expression, having faced similar challenges throughout her career. What specific concerns, Admiral? You've created an effective program, but it exists as a parallel structure to our traditional leadership development pathways. For your approach to have lasting impact, it needs to be integrated into our core training philosophy rather than operating as a specialized initiative. The observation surprised Maya. Rather than challenging her approach, the Admiral was suggesting its expansion beyond special operations into the broader military structure. I'm recommending your promotion to Lieutenant Colonel, Admiral Jackson continued, and reassignment to the Combat Leadership Academy as its new commandant. The Academy trains all senior combat leaders across all branches. If your methodologies are as effective as these results suggest, they should become the standard for all combat leadership development, not just special operations. The Combat Leadership Academy represented the heart of traditional military leadership doctrine, the institution that had been training combat commanders for generations, according to principles that Maya's program had challenged at every level. Taking command of the Academy would mean expanding her approach from special operations to the entire combat leadership structure. The Academy has significant institutional momentum, Admiral, Maya replied carefully. There will be substantial resistance to the changes I would implement. Admiral Jackson's expression hardened slightly. 5 years ago, you faced similar resistance when implementing your program within special operations. The results speak for themselves. The question is whether you're willing to face that resistance again on a larger scale. As Maya considered the Admiral's offer, she realized this represented the ultimate test of everything she had built. Special operations had always been more adaptable, more willing to embrace unconventional approaches when they produced results. The broader military leadership structure would present far greater challenges to her methodology. I accept, Admiral, she said finally. On one condition, I bring my core team with me. This transformation will require leaders who already understand and embody the principles we're implementing. 3 months later, Lieutenant Colonel Maya Reyes stood at the entrance to the Combat Leadership Academy, studying the imposing structure that had been training military leaders according to traditional doctrine for over 60 years. The classical architecture and formal parade grounds reflected an institutional philosophy that valued tradition and conformity above innovation and adaptation. Looks like a fortress designed to keep new ideas out, observed Captain Sarah Martinez, who had been among Maya's first graduates and now served as her chief instructor. Over the years, Martinez had become Maya's most trusted colleague, her analytical mind perfectly complementing Maya's intuitive leadership style. That's exactly what it's been, Maya agreed. Our job is to transform it from within, not by tearing down traditions that matter, but by demonstrating which approaches actually produce better combat leaders. Their arrival had been preceded by rumors and speculation throughout the academy. Staff. Most of the instructors were decorated combat veterans who had risen through traditional pathways, their approaches shaped by decades of conventional military doctrine. Many viewed Maya's appointment with suspicion or outright hostility, a political decision that threatened the institutional values they had dedicated their careers to upholding. Colonel William Foster, who had served as the Academy's executive officer for 7 years, waited to greet them at the main administration building. His rigid posture and carefully neutral expression revealed nothing about his personal feelings regarding the leadership change. "Lieutenant Colonel Reyes," he said formally, "welcome to the Combat Leadership Academy. Your office has been prepared according to protocol, and the staff is assembled in the main conference room for your initial address." Maya studied Foster carefully, recognizing the same resistance she had encountered throughout her career. Not expressed through open opposition, but through rigid adherence to procedure and tradition. "Thank you, Colonel. I look forward to working with the Academy staff to build on its distinguished history." The conference room fell silent as Maya entered. 50 senior instructors studying their new commandant with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. These were the military's elite leadership trainers, men and women who had spent decades teaching conventional approaches to combat command. "Good morning," Maya began, choosing to stand among them rather than taking the elevated position at the head of the room. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Maya Reyes. Before we discuss the future of this academy, I want to acknowledge its past. For 60 years, this institution has produced combat leaders who have served with distinction in conflicts around the world. That legacy deserves respect." The acknowledgement seemed to ease some of the tension in the room, though many instructors remained visibly skeptical. "I'm not here to dismantle traditions that serve a purpose," Maya continued. "I'm here because combat itself is evolving, and our approaches to leadership development must evolve with it. The measure of our success isn't how well we preserve doctrine, but how effectively our graduates lead when facing the realities of modern combat environments." Colonel Foster raised his hand with deliberate formality. "With respect, Colonel Reyes, many of us have concerns about applying special operations methodologies to conventional combat leadership roles. The operational contexts are fundamentally different." Maya nodded, having anticipated this exact concern. "A valid observation, Colonel. Which is why we're not simply transferring special operations approaches to conventional settings. We're implementing a more fundamental principle, selecting and developing leaders based on adaptability rather than conformity, measured by performance under pressure rather than adherence to tradition." For the next hour, Maya outlined her vision for the Academy's evolution, not a radical restructuring, but a methodical transformation in how combat leadership potential was identified and developed. The core curriculum would remain, but the evaluation metrics would shift from how well candidates followed established doctrine to how effectively they adapted when doctrine failed to address actual conditions. "Our first challenge," Maya concluded, "is to establish objective measurement of our current effectiveness. Before implementing any changes, we need to understand precisely how our graduates perform under the conditions that actually matter in combat, not controlled training scenarios, but the chaotic, unpredictable environments where lives depend on leadership decisions." The data collection process that followed revealed patterns that even Maya found surprising. Academy graduates excelled in operations where conditions matched training scenarios, but struggled significantly when facing situations that deviated from expected parameters. The most decorated combat leaders among Academy alumni weren't those who had mastered doctrine most completely, but those who had developed the ability to adapt when doctrine proved insufficient. "The data shows something remarkable," Maya explained during a briefing with her senior staff 3 months into her command. "The Academy has always produced 2 types of leaders, those who excel at implementing doctrine, and those who excel at adapting when doctrine fails. We've been selecting for and rewarding the first type, but combat success correlates more strongly with the second. Captain Martinez displayed the analysis on the main screen. The most successful graduates weren't those with the highest academic scores or the most perfect drill performances. They were those who demonstrated creative problem-solving and adaptation during the field exercises, where unexpected complications were introduced. Colonel Foster studied the data with growing interest. Despite his initial resistance, he had proven surprisingly open to evidence-based assessment. So you're suggesting we should be selecting for adaptability rather than doctrinal mastery? Not instead of, Maya clarified. In addition to. Doctrine exists for a reason. It represents accumulated wisdom from past operations. But doctrine alone is insufficient when conditions change faster than doctrine can evolve. We need leaders who understand established approaches, but aren't constrained by them when reality demands something different. The implementation plan Maya developed represented a careful balance between respecting the Academy's traditions and transforming its fundamental approach. Core curriculum remained largely unchanged, but evaluation criteria shifted dramatically, from measuring how well candidates followed established procedures to assessing how effectively they adapted when those procedures proved inadequate. 6 months into her command, Maya faced her first major test when General Harris, the Army Chief of Staff, arrived for the Academy's annual review. Known as a traditionalist who valued discipline and doctrinal consistency, Harris had initially opposed Maya's appointment to the Academy command. "Colonel Reyes," he said during their initial meeting, "I understand you've implemented significant changes to the Academy's evaluation methodology. Some of my advisors have expressed concerns that we're moving away from the disciplined approach that has defined military leadership for generations." Maya had anticipated this challenge and prepared accordingly. "General, I'd like to demonstrate our approach rather than simply describing it. Would you be willing to observe one of our advanced training scenarios?" The scenario in question had been specifically designed to test leadership adaptation under deteriorating conditions. A simulated combat operation where intelligence proved faulty, terrain differed from maps, and enemy forces employed unexpected tactics. 2 candidate teams were participating, one led by officers selected under traditional criteria, the other by officers identified through Maya's adaptive assessment methodology. As General Harris observed from the control center, the operation unfolded with carefully orchestrated complications introduced by the training staff. When the primary route became impassable, when communication systems failed, when casualties required mission modification, all conditions common in actual combat, but rarely incorporated into traditional training, the differences between the teams became increasingly evident. The traditionally selected team responded by adhering more rigidly to doctrine, attempting to force the situation to conform to established procedures, even as conditions made those procedures increasingly ineffective. The adaptively selected team, by contrast, quickly recognized when standard approaches were failing and developed alternative methods based on actual conditions rather than expected scenarios. "The performance difference is remarkable, General," Harris acknowledged as the exercise concluded. "But this raises a significant question, Colonel. If we select for adaptability rather than doctrinal adherence, do we risk creating leaders who ignore established procedures, even when those procedures would be effective?" "A legitimate concern, sir," Maya replied. "Which is why our approach doesn't diminish doctrinal training, it contextualizes it. We teach established procedures while simultaneously developing the judgment to recognize when those procedures should be modified or abandoned based on actual conditions." The general nodded thoughtfully. "Your approach challenges our traditional understanding of military leadership, Colonel. But I can't argue with the results. Continue your implementation, but provide quarterly assessment reports directly to my office." If the field performance of your graduates continues to show these improvements, we'll need to consider expanding your methodology beyond the academy. As Maya's approach gained traction within the academy, resistance gradually transformed into engagement. Instructors who had initially opposed her changes began contributing their own experiences of when doctrine had proven insufficient in actual combat, enriching the training scenarios with real-world complexities that no training manual could anticipate. Colonel Foster, once the embodiment of institutional resistance, became one of Maya's strongest advocates after observing the performance differences in field exercises. "I've spent 20 years teaching leaders to follow doctrine," he admitted during a staff meeting. "But I've also spent 15 years in combat environments where doctrine often failed to address actual conditions." Colonel Reyes isn't dismantling our traditions, she's making them relevant to the realities our graduates will actually face. 1 year into Maya's command, the first class of graduates trained under her methodology deployed to combat positions around the world. Their performance in actual operations would provide the ultimate test of whether her approach produced more effective combat leaders than traditional methods. The results exceeded even Maya's expectations. In operational environments ranging from counter-terrorism in urban settings to conventional force engagements in complex terrain, graduates of the transformed academy consistently demonstrated superior decision-making under pressure, more effective adaptation to changing conditions, and higher mission success rates with lower casualty figures. "The data is conclusive," Maya reported during her presentation to the Joint Chiefs of Staff 18 months after taking command. Graduates selected and trained for adaptive capability rather than doctrinal conformity demonstrate significantly higher effectiveness across all combat leadership metrics. Admiral Jackson, who had championed Maya's appointment against significant institutional resistance, studied the performance statistics with satisfaction. "You've done more than improve leadership training, Colonel Reyes. You've fundamentally transformed how we understand combat effectiveness itself." The most powerful validation came not from statistics or official reports, but from the field commanders who worked with academy graduates. "The new officers coming out of the academy are different," reported Colonel James Roberts, a battalion commander in the 10th Mountain Division. "They understand doctrine thoroughly, but they're not constrained by it when conditions change. They adapt faster, make better decisions under pressure, and maintain unit effectiveness even when everything goes wrong." 2 years into her command, Maya received notification of her promotion to full colonel and an unusual invitation to address the graduating class at West Point, the institutional heart of Army leadership tradition. The invitation represented recognition that her approach had implications beyond combat leadership development, potentially transforming how military leadership was understood and developed from the earliest stages. As she prepared her address, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From being systematically excluded from combat leadership roles to redefining how combat leadership was identified and developed throughout the military, the transformation had occurred not through confrontation or institutional mandate, but through the persistent demonstration that different approaches produced better results under the conditions that actually mattered. Leadership isn't defined by how well you perform when everything goes according to plan, she told the assembled cadets during her address. It's defined by what you do when plans fail, when intelligence proves wrong, when conditions change beyond recognition. True leadership emerges not from perfect execution of established doctrine, but from the ability to adapt and succeed when doctrine no longer applies to reality. The cadets listened with rapt attention as Maya shared examples from her own experience and from the performance of academy graduates, stories of leaders who succeeded not despite challenging established approaches, but because they had the courage to adapt when circumstances demanded innovation rather than tradition. The greatest obstacle to effective leadership isn't external opposition, she concluded. It's the internal voice that values conformity over effectiveness, that chooses familiar failure over unfamiliar success, that prioritizes how things have always been done over what actually works in this specific situation. Courage in leadership isn't just about facing enemy fire. It's about challenging assumptions when reality proves them wrong, even when those assumptions are held by the very institution you serve. As Maya concluded her address, the cadet commander approached the podium with a presentation case. "Colonel Reyes, the Corps of Cadets has voted to present you with this token of our respect and appreciation." Inside the case was a simple plaque bearing the West Point motto, "Duty, Honor, Country," with an additional inscription, "To Colonel Maya Reyes, who taught us that true honor lies in effective service rather than blind tradition." 3 years into her command of the Combat Leadership Academy, Maya received unexpected visitors. Colonel Hayes, now approaching retirement, accompanied by 3 junior officers. Hayes had continued his own transformation over the years, eventually becoming an advocate for the very changes he had once resisted so vigorously. "Colonel Reyes," he said formally, "I've brought these officers to meet you because they represent everything your approach has accomplished. Each of them comes from backgrounds that our traditional system would have excluded from combat leadership consideration. Each has demonstrated exceptional performance under the most challenging conditions." Maya welcomed the officers immediately, recognizing from their bearing and situational awareness that they were special operations personnel, recently returned from deployment. "What can I do for you?" The senior lieutenant, a woman whose service badges indicated multiple combat deployments, stepped forward. "Colonel, we just completed an extraction operation in the Korangal Valley. The mission parameters changed dramatically. During execution, weather, enemy disposition, civilian presence, everything complicated simultaneously. We implemented the adaptive protocols you developed, modifying them for the specific conditions we encountered." Maya listened carefully, hearing echoes of her own experiences in the officer's description. "The outcome? Complete mission success, ma'am. 14 hostages rescued, 0 casualties on our side, minimal engagement with enemy forces. A mission that conventional approaches would have deemed impossible." Colonel Hayes watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction. "They tell the story about you at every special operations briefing, Colonel. How they laughed when you asked for a combat slot, how you took command during that critical battle, how you transformed everything we thought we knew about combat leadership." Maya shook her head slightly. "The story isn't about me. It's about recognizing that effective leadership often comes from unexpected sources, from people and perspectives that traditional systems overlook or exclude." "With respect, Colonel," said the lieutenant, "the story is important. When I face resistance because I don't match someone's expectation of what a combat leader should look like, that story reminds me that performance matters more than perception. When someone questions whether I belong in a tactical planning session, I remember how you transformed resistance into respect through results rather than arguments." 5 years after taking command of the Combat Leadership Academy, Maya stood on the parade ground watching the graduation ceremony for her final class. The transformation she had implemented had become the new standard for combat leadership development throughout the military, her approach now institutionalized in doctrine and training methodologies across all service branches. Admiral Jackson, now chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, had come personally to present the graduation address and to announce Maya's next assignment, promotion to Brigadier General and appointment as Director of Joint Force Development, a position from which she would influence how all military forces trained and operated together. "The graduates before you represent the future of military leadership," the Admiral told the assembled audience of family members, senior officers, and defense officials. "They've been selected not for conformity to tradition, but for demonstrated ability to perform under the conditions that actually determine success in modern combat environments." As the graduates received their commissions and assignments, Maya reflected on the distance traveled since her own early career, from being systematically excluded because she didn't match traditional expectations to reshaping those expectations based on actual performance rather than appearance or background. General Reyes has transformed not just how we train combat leaders, but how we understand combat leadership itself, Admiral Jackson concluded. The officers graduating today will serve in a military that values effectiveness over tradition, that measures leadership by results rather than appearance, that selects and promotes based on the ability to succeed when conditions demand adaptation rather than conformity. After the ceremony, Maya visited the Academy's Memorial Hall, where photographs and citations honored graduates who had demonstrated exceptional leadership in combat. Among the recent additions was a special display dedicated to the transformation in leadership development that had revolutionized military effectiveness over the past decade. The central image showed Maya during the Camel Valley rescue operation, directing her team as they implemented the innovative extraction that had saved 12 operators from what conventional wisdom deemed an impossible situation. Beside it was a simple inscription that captured the essence of everything she had worked to establish. They laughed when she asked for a combat slot. Then she took the lead in battle and transformed how we understand leadership itself. The woman they had laughed at had indeed changed everything, not through confrontation or complaint, but through performance that proved more powerful than prejudice or tradition could withstand. Her legacy wasn't just the lives saved through successful operations, but the transformation in how the military identified and developed the leadership qualities that actually determined success when lives and missions hung in the balance. As Maya prepared to leave the academy for her new role, she passed a training exercise where a diverse group of candidates was navigating a complex scenario requiring constant adaptation to changing conditions. Their approaches reflected exactly the principles she had worked so hard to establish: thorough understanding of doctrine, combined with the flexibility to adapt when actual conditions demanded innovation rather than tradition. The true measure of leadership, she had often told her instructors, isn't found in how well you implement established procedures when conditions match expectations. It's found in what you do when reality defies all expectations and lives depend on your ability to adapt rather than persist with approaches that no longer fit the situation you're actually facing. The transformation she had created would continue long after her departure, not because of institutional mandate or policy directive, but because it produced results that spoke for themselves: more effective operations, lower casualty rates, higher mission success under the complex, unpredictable conditions that defined modern combat environments. The woman they had laughed at when she asked for a combat slot had taken the lead not just in battle, but in redefining what combat leadership meant and how it was developed. Her legacy was written not in medals or monuments, but in the lives saved through better leadership and the missions accomplished through approaches that traditional thinking would have deemed impossible. If you enjoyed this inspiring story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more content that celebrates resilience, determination, and the power of proving yourself through action rather than words. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. Have you ever been underestimated or faced obstacles because you didn't fit someone's expectations? Share your experience in the comments. We read every single one and draw inspiration from your stories of overcoming barriers through performance and persistence. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.